What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. After what was a somewhat disappointing patch 5.4, I'm happy to announce that I actually think patch 5.5 might seriously be one of the best patches of all time. I don't think I've ever seen so many buffs in just a single patch. Anyways, I'm here with my rundown and analysis of all the major changes in today's patch. Let's get started. Starting with the major champion changes, and there are actually quite a boatload. First off, Bard will be released in patch 5.5 in a bit after the patch goes live. He's a pretty awesome support champion with a really strong kit, so definitely check him out. In addition, Azir is getting a nice buff with the increase on the range of his soldiers by 50 and a slight base attack speed buff. Hopefully this will make him viable again without making him super strong like he was before, and I think it's a pretty good change. So we can't expect Azir to make a comeback, as I think these buffs are probably enough for him to do well. Kassadin also received a major buff on this patch. All of those crazy PvE videos you've seen, well, those changes are hitting live. His ultimate had its range increased by 50 and its mana cost and cooldown lowered. At rank 3 it actually has a 2-second cooldown with no cooldown reduction, so his late game is kind of terror now if it wasn't already. Expect Kassadin to be quite strong once again, just a little bit weaker in the mid game and a little bit stronger in the late game than the old Kassadin before the range on his ultimate got nerfed. Nautilus is also receiving some major changes in the patch. His W does a bit less damage, but they are increasing the ratio on it and lowering the cooldown and mana cost of his E, which should help his clear speed quite a lot. Overall, it's definitely a buff, and I think it will be enough for him to definitely see some play in solo queue, but he still kind of has the same problems that will probably prevent him from being played on the competitive level. Natalie got a nerf to her traps, which hurts her clear speed a reasonable amount, but I definitely think she will still be top tier, as the nerf isn't really that significant. Sion received a really nice buff in the lowering of his mana costs and an increase in the AD ratio on his Q. On what was already a top tier top laner, expect these buffs to be really nice, and he honestly might now be one of the best, if not the best top laner in the game after this buff, since he was already really strong and played at the competitive level. Skarner also received a major buff in increased base damages on both his Q and E. This helps his clear speed quite a bit and might be enough to put him in the competitive spotlight. I'm not sure though, since his ultimate still has the same problems as before. However, definitely expect to see him in solo queue. Trundle received some solid buffs in increased range on his passive and increased healing on his W. This sustain should help his laning out a lot and make him a strong top laner once again. It's not a massive buff, but I think it's definitely what he needed for him to be able to succeed again in a tank heavy meta. Whether or not the meta is actually tank heavy and is something that Trundle can succeed in is a different story, but he definitely now has the tools that he needs to do well, so expect to see him played. Urgot also received a major buff in an increased ratio on his shield, although the base stats were lowered, and a lowered cooldown on his ultimate. Overall, it's definitely a buff, and he might be good enough for competitive play now, and I honestly thought he was already good enough for solo queue, but people just don't really play him since he isn't an appealing champion. However, he does have a rework coming soon, so it's possible that teams won't pick him up until he gets his major changes. Veigar also received some major buffs. His Q has a faster missile speed and the delay on his stun was reduced by a quarter of a second. I still think the fact that his stun has any delay at all is kind of stupid, to be honest, and so I don't think these buffs are even close to what he needs to be competitive, but I guess it is a step in the right direction. Vi also received some nerfs in reduced movement speed and reduced base damage on her ultimate. This should make her level 6 ganks a tiny bit weaker, since she will have a harder time soloing out people, but she definitely will be really strong still. Xin Zhao received some buffs in the form of increased damage on his E and increased heal on his W. This should definitely help out his jungling quite a bit, so expect to see him being played on this patch. I think this buff is actually really nice, and we might even see him in competitive play once again. Zac received changes in the form of an increased knockup duration on his E and a quality of life feature on his W, which lowers the cooldown quite a bit, so of course it's definitely a buff. Overall, it should help his clear speed and ganking, but I don't think it will be enough for competitive play since he still does pretty much no damage. However, he will probably be played in solo queue now because the increased crowd control duration is really useful. And that wraps up the major champion changes. It looks like we will see a lot more junglers rise up, especially in solo queue. For competitive play, I'm not so sure, but I'm really happy with the champion changes this patch. There was also some changes to items. Luden's Echo, the new 120 AP item, has finally been released. I think the item is pretty solid and helps out with burst quite a lot, and the passive is cool and the movement speed is actually really useful. Honestly, I'm not too sure how this will fit into the core, heavily streamlined AP builds that take place right now, but the 7% movement speed is actually really strong on a mid laner, and so the item has the potential to be really powerful. It's very possible that this item becomes the new pickup for any AP mid laner who wants to build a damage item early in the game, as the passive does help a reasonable amount with burst and the movement speed is super useful. There's also some new jungle items. Bami's Cinder, which now builds into Sunfire Cape and the Health Jungle item. It gives 300 health and a mini Sunfire passive for 1000 gold. It's intended to help the clear speed of tanks in the jungle, and it will, but only by a really small amount since the passive doesn't really do all that much damage. However, it is a nice change to tank junglers. In addition, Cider Hulk has replaced the old jungle tank item, Juggernaut. I think this item is reasonably better than Juggernaut, and the passive, comparable to Sunfire Cape, and much stronger than Bami's Cinder, will help clearing jungle camps quite a bit. And all in all, it's a nice buff to tank junglers, and a step in the right direction for jungle diversity. Raptor's Cloak and Xerath Portal receive some buffs as well, but the active still kind of just has no real major use. However, 60 armor and 60 magic resistance on an item is actually kind of decent, so it's possible that we may see tanks pick it up as a third or fourth item to supplement their build, and I think it's actually potentially a viable tank item after you pick up 2 or 3 health items. Righteous Glory also received a huge buff as the health on it was increased by 150. As an item that was already occasionally purchased on tanks that have high mana costs, we can now expect this item to become honestly really popular, especially since the active is really good. The increase of health by 150 with an unchanged cost is going to make this item super strong, so definitely consider picking it up when playing tanks that use mana. Inhibitor and Nexus turrets now only give 50 gold and 0 experience. I actually really like this change. I think it's really nice since the map pressure of taking the turret was already way more than enough, so it makes the snowball reasonably less significant and should help comebacks by a tiny amount. And the jungle camps have been nerfed as well. Gromp and the Raptors do significantly less damage, while the Wolf camp now gives more gold. Overall, a really nice change, and should help out the jungler's clear speed quite a bit. The Gromp Smite buff no longer scales with level, and instead scales with bonus health, so it's a nice buff to tank junglers once again, and I think we're kind of seeing a recurring theme here. And lastly, the new Summoner's Rift map is officially out of beta. Overall, it was a pretty nice patch, and Riot has taken some great steps towards jungle diversity, as well as just buffing champions in general. We'll have to see how the buffs affect bruiser junglers, but overall, I think it was some great moves, and I'm really satisfied with this patch. Anyways, that just about wraps it up. Any changes I didn't go over were considered to be minor and insignificant. My name is Jeremy, and this was my rundown and analysis of patch 5.5. Hey guys, it's me, Jeremy. Thanks for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, definitely make sure to hit that like button so I can tell, and if you're interested, definitely check me out over on all the socials, of which you can see over there. And if you really enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe for some more awesome content in the future, and definitely check out some of my other videos as well, up here and over there. Anyways, that's going to be it. Thanks again for watching, and of course, I'll see you guys next time.